Hi everybody, I'm Jim. Today I want to do a brief reading update and then a more extended book hauls video. I've finished a couple things, and I want to also focus on some active reads that I'm working on. And then the bulk of the video is really going to be about book hauls, because I've been gathering up more books, and these are like multiple hauls. Some were only one book, some were a bunch. I have a bag of books to show you. It's going to be fun. Okay, let's first start off with recent finished books. My pace of reading seems to be slowing down a little bit in August in terms of books finished. I mean, I feel like I'm reading the same amount that I was in July, but I finished a lot more books in July than I finished in August. Anyway, that's just how sometimes it works. But I did finish the Poetics by Aristotle on poetics, and that I did a video on that, so I won't talk about this much here. But it's a short treatise on literary theory, and an excellent book. And that was a reread for me. The other book I finished just a day or two ago was this sci-fi novel, The World Inside by Robert Silverberg. And this was a pretty cool sci-fi novel. I'll read you the back copy. Urbaman, a 1,000-story climb into the sky. So it's about these skyscrapers that have been built on Earth to solve the population problem. Humanity massed 3 kilometers high, the ultimate solution to the population problem. Build up, not out. The year is 2381. The place is Urban Monad 116 of the constellation Chipets. The population of this 1,000-story structure is 800,000 plus. 800,000 people live in this 1,000-story skyscraper, and always growing. The essence of life is to be blessworthy and to multiply, to afford one's neighbors any type of sexual fulfillment, and above all, to avoid the evil of frustration. So one of the strengths of this Silverberg novel is the world building. Like, he does a great job of explaining how life works in this building, and the odd feature of everyone is encouraged to be fruitful and multiply and have sex pretty much with anyone they want to. So the men especially go on these night walks. There's very little privacy in this, quote, utopian skyscraper. And so they can go on these night walks and just roam around and enter anyone's apartment and sleep with any woman they want to. It's a bit of a male fantasy, I guess. And sometimes it works the other way. Sometimes it's bisexual, but for the most part, it's like heterosexual. And the woman can't refuse, like, it's very much frowned on for her to refuse. And so a lot of babies are made, and that's a blessworthy thing in this society. Anyway, but every world has its heretics, and there are those who question the quality of life in the Urbmans. On every level of the building, there are these hidden malcontents who feel such perverse desires as a longing for privacy, a wish to descend from the heights of Urbman, a longing to walk on earth and bask in sunshine. Within these individuals lies danger, the seed of discontent with the vertical world of 2381, and in this stratified world of the 24th century. Who is to say which are more truly human, the contented masses of Urbman society or the rebel throwbacks to an earlier Earth? It was a well-written novel, like, for this kind of thing. I'm envious of these pulp fiction, sci-fi fiction, any kind of popular fiction writers who, they just seem so facile with language. Like, they can just crank out prose, and it's well written. That's not as easy as it might seem. Just because it's popular doesn't mean like it's easy. And Silverberg, who was an incredibly prolific writer. I mean, he wrote a lot of sci-fi. He wrote a lot of like softcore porn in the 60s when he didn't have sci-fi work. And that you can kind of tell with a lot of the sex scenes in this novel. Like, that's kind of what he's done before. And he can get that across. This is kind of like a late 60s novel. 1970 was the original copyright. Basically, it's really strong on world building, maybe a little less so on plot, but it does kind of come around to a plot where, but initially he's profiling these different characters. A lot of them have these like seeds of discontent to them, and very, very good characterization, I would say, and good setting, world building. And then there's this very long chapter, which almost is, I think it's like novella length practically. And I have a feeling like I'm not up on my Silverberg. I was researching him a little bit. Like, he's a relatively new author for me, but I feel like that long chapter might have been a standalone story. It might have been called The World Outside, because it's about one of the characters in the building who is able to get a pass to to exit the building, and he goes off on this little journey to the kind of ex-urban, like, agricultural commune, and people are very different there. And I won't get into the details, but it's dangerous things happen there, and then he actually has to come. He realizes he has to get away, and he comes back to the building, and it ends tragically. But that was almost like a little standalone story where you really got a sense of plot. And then the last chapter is about another character who's discontented. He's like a yuppie, and he's like climbing to the highest echelons of the building. It's very tiered, hierarchical society, and each kind of area is named after a city on Earth. And he is discontented, and so that sort of ends tragically too. But yeah, The World Inside, I was pretty impressed with this Robert Silverberg sci-fi novel. It was good to read some sci-fi. I got this at a sale a year or two ago, and it was nice to get around and finish it. So yeah, there's a lot more you could say about Silverberg. I did read one other thing by him this year, which was a co-written book, and I forgot the title of it already, but it wasn't bad, but this is better. This one's better. You might classify this as like new wave sci-fi, I'm not sure. Anyway, let me know if you've read it, what you think of him, and just Silverberg in general, and that book in particular. That's it for the books I've finished. Currently, the hottest read right now is this one I picked up, Seneca, Letters from a Stoic, and you can see how that cover is sliced. So this was a not-for-resale book, and I picked this up as I was shelving my Penguin Classics, and I thought, well, maybe I should just unhaul this, just give it away, put it in a box, and because I don't like covers like that. I thought, well, maybe I should read it first, because I realized I hadn't read it before. And Seneca, by the way, was like a tutor of Nero, and he was very well connected. In fact, there were times, during Nero's earlier reign where Seneca and another old guy, like, for all intents and purposes, like, were like major advisors running the country. But anyway, and then Nero, he had a falling out with Nero, and he was kind of instructed to go, like, commit suicide. And he also wrote plays. Very literary man, philosophical, Stoic philosopher. Anyway, I thought I should read this, and before I got rid of it, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's a selection of his letters. The letters really read like mini essays, and it's very, very good. I'll have more to say about this after I finish it, but I'm very much enjoying that read. There's a lot of other stuff I'm reading, but that's kind of the ones on the hot seat right now. So let's get right to book hauls. All right, this is going to take a while. I'll just go in some random order here. This is not exactly chronological order. This is just availability, what's within reach. At a local, just up the block here, there's about a block away, there's a nice little free library. And I picked up this, I walked past this book a lot of times, and then I finally pulled it out, and it's Elizabeth Gaskell, Sylvia's Lovers. Gaskell is a Victorian, British author. He goes, here's what this book is about. It's not in the best condition, which is why I hesitated to take it, but this won't be a keeper. Anyway, it's an Oxford World's Classic, one of their earlier editions, and edited with an introduction by Andrew Sanders. Described by Mrs. Gaskell as the saddest story I ever wrote, Sylvia's Lovers is set during the French Revolutionary Wars in the remote whaling port of Monkshaven in Yorkshire. The sea dominates the lives of the inhabitants. Whalers returning from their long and dangerous trips to Greenland bring crowds to the quayside. Every local man has tales to recount of his exploits at sea, and smuggling is rife. The people of Monkshaven hate the French, but they live in greater and more immediate fear of the dreaded incursions of the callous press gang, who snatch sailors from returning from a whaling trip before they have ever spoken to their friends or families. In Mrs. Gaskell's provincial England, war is seen to mirror a private violence which has already disrupted the lives of her fictional characters. Sylvia is a heroine loved by two men of completely different types: the bold sailor Charlie Kinraid and the cautious and conventional Philip Hepburn, who idolizes her. The novel follows her development from a willful, imaginative, but not especially clever girl to an alert woman who has been matured by her acute suffering. So that is a book I never heard of before. I have one or two other books by her that are more famous, which I haven't read yet. North and South, I think, is one of them. Cranford is another. But was not familiar with this one. So this will not be a book I'm getting around to immediately. But if I get the desire to read some Victorian literature, this one might be up soon. Here's a book by Philip Roth that my wife picked up. She was up in Vermont visiting our daughter. She and her mother took the train up, and they were doing a lot of shopping, more than I can handle, I'm sure. I was back home here cat sitting, and she knew I really liked American Pastoral, a book I reviewed here on the channel. And we had unhauled a ton of Philip Roth. Like I had a lot of him in hardcover, and then I went on a major purge, got rid of a lot of his books that I hadn't read. But I liked American Pastoral so much, which was a little library find, that I'm much more in the mood to read him now. I'm not saying I'll keep all his books, but anyway, she got me this memoir called Patrimony, which is about the death of his father, who I started reading, and it's really good. It's very sobering and kind of depressing, but it's his father had like a brain tumor, so it's about like the end of his life. And it's got, basically it's a memoir about that. And, Philip Roth is a very, very fine writer, no matter what you think about the man, and he certainly had flaws. He's a really good writer. So there's that. Another book, this was one I got at our local public library, which has, it has like some shelves where you can like buy books. So you make a donation, like they ask for a donation of like $1. So I picked this one. Whenever I see MYRB classics, I tend to pick them up. So I sight unseen, I just don't even know these books, but I'm just like, I like the series. I kind of collect them. I don't have a huge collection of them. Someday I'll show you my collection of MYRB classics. But this was one of them. Only cost me $1. It's called 3 Summers by Margarita Liberacki, translated by Karen Van Dyke. And what's this about? Don't you love their covers? 3 Summers is the story of 3 sisters growing up in the countryside near Athens before the Second World War. Living in a big old house surrounded by a beautiful garden are Maria, the oldest sister, as sexually bold as she is eager to settle down and have a family of her own. Beautiful but distant Infanta, and dreamy and rebellious Katerina, through whose eyes the story is mostly observed. Over 3 summers, the girls share and keep secrets, fall in and out of love, try to figure out their parents and other members of the tribe of adults, take note of the weird ways of friends and neighbors, worry about and wonder who they are. Karen Van Dyke's translation captures all the light and warmth of this modern Greek classic. Yep, couldn't pass on that. All right. I went to this newish Goodwill that's quite close by here. Been checking that store out every 10 days to 2 weeks to see what's new. The books are slow to move off those shelves, but I did find one that either I missed the last time I was in the store or it was new on the shelf. And that is a history book by Jean-Denis Bredin, The Affair, the Case of Alfred Dreyfus. This is a massive book all about the Dreyfus Affair. I think it came out in the 80s, and it was considered 83, or published. The translation published in 86. It was acclaimed as the definitive account of the Dreyfus Affair. It has photos. I started reading it. It was very good so far. The Dreyfus Affair I've encountered through some other books I've read. So in Proust's In Search of Lost Time, the Dreyfus Affair is part of the backstory. Also, Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism talks about the Dreyfus Affair. And I'm always wanting to learn more history. So this was like a great find. So I'm looking forward to reading that. What else? Okay, I'll save these for later. Here, let me share with you my big bag sale haul. I was at the local charity bookshop, and I'm always dropping stuff off there, donating stuff. All their proceeds go to, it's all volunteers. And their proceeds go to support the local food bank. Anyway, I couldn't resist. I've been on the prowl now for these mass market paperbacks. Like, I'll show you an example. Like this. Like old Signet classics. Old Bantam classics. Suddenly, I have this desire to collect more of them. And this is after probably unhauling a bunch of these books that I used to have years and years ago. It's funny how our tastes change. But anyway, it's something I'm kind of into these days. Here's another one. This is Pierre or the Ambiguities. These are books I've already had. I'll put him up here. Anyway, I like the old design of these books. In some cases, the paper quality is better than in others. But it's just something I'm just kind of getting into. So at this store in their little classics room, they had a bunch of them. And they're not all the old ones, but I threw them in the bag anyway. I haven't done a bag sale in quite a long time. There are also some other books, a few Penguin classics. And I'll just whip through these pretty quickly because there's a lot of them. First, we have Gorky, My Childhood. This is a Penguin Classics, one of the older ones. I call these second series. Russian literature. Here's the kind of Signet classic I'm interested in finding, Darkness at Noon by Arthur Koestler. And these early Signet classic paperback editions, they tend to be early 60s or late 50s, early 60s. This one's 1961. That's the vintage that I'm sort of looking for. I really like these drawn covers. This is a book I read in a different edition, and I really liked it more than I thought I was going to like it. I unhauled it, and now I found it in Signet Classics, and it's a book that I would reread, especially after reading The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. This is about totalitarianism too. Sorry, Mike. And yeah, it's I feel like folding back on it at some point, and it's really about like the show trials and like the kind of the experience of someone who was a true believer in Stalinist communism, and then like his fortunes change and he gets put in prison, and it doesn't end well. This is not a Signet classic. It's a Signet though. It's a Signet paperback, a little bit old. But it's a Sinclair Lewis novel, Dodsworth, that I haven't read. Dodsworth is the world famous novel about a wealthy industrialist who is reluctantly led to Europe's capitals and into its highborn society by his beautiful, spoiled, and deeply loved wife. Yeah, don't know much about it, but I want to read more Sinclair Lewis. Now, not all these Signet classics were the old vintage ones that I'm kind of looking for to collect, but I couldn't resist getting some of these because, they have continued to publish for all these decades, and you can still get Signet classics. and they perform a great service. They're affordable. School kids buy them all the time. I can't tell you how many Signet Classics I bought for high school or for college classes. They were just a great option, and they continue to be. And some of these newer editions, I like the cover art too, or I couldn't help myself. I was trying to fill the bag, but anyway, whatever. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, a selection. So not the full Canterbury Tales, but these are edited with an introduction by Donald R. Howard. Sometimes I'll buy these editions for the intros or the afterwords, or this is more of a modern translation of Chaucer, who was this guy, Donald Howard, professor of medieval literature at Johns Hopkins. Normalized spelling system for easier reading, extensive footnotes. Yeah, kind of cool. This struck me as sort of interesting too. The Travels of Marco Polo, a newer Signet Classics. I like the cover. Edited with an introduction by Milton Rugoff, afterword by Howard Middlemark. Marco Polo. This one is a vintage Signet Classic from 1965, and it's The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot, which I read a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago. The Mill on the Floss. It's a nice cover art. Not only did they have Signet Classics, but they had Bantam Classics. Now, I don't think as many Bantam Classics have been published as Signet Classics if you look at lists, but they published a healthy amount, and I think those are still in print too. I'm not quite as fond of the Bantam Classic look these days, but there is a certain era of Bantam Classics that I really do like, and it's roughly from the late 70s through the early 80s. So for example, this one is 85 and was reissued in 92. So pretty much throughout the 80s, they were publishing books that looked like this. Here's Middlemarch by George Eliot, a book I had in Modern Library on Hauled. I read it, and I really need to reread it because so many people love this book, and I wasn't as enamored of it. I found it a bit of a slog. The first part was like really, really good, and then I sagged. I ran out of gas, but I did finish it. But I know that was more about me than about George Eliot, so I want to reread it. I thought, well, why not pick up this Bantam Classic? There it is. The look of these, they use this sans serif font that could be in like avant-garde typeface, something like that. Clean. Sometimes they use pretty good artwork on the covers. This is a very clean copy, clearly not red. Something stamped there on the edge. What else we got? Here's a Penguin Classic, a Thomas Hardy book that I didn't really know about before. It's called The Trumpet Major. Light, humorous, and observant. Has a vein of tragedy running through it. The unhappiness and despair of unrequited love. Anne Garland lives with her widowed mother in a mill owned by Miller Loveday. She is wooed by three men: the stupid, coarse Festus Derriman, great name, a man with expectations; John Loveday, the quiet, thoughtful trumpet major; and Bob, his brother, a sailor, whose heart isn't as faithful as it should have been. In the course of the story, Anne has to overcome many obstacles and hazards before she marries the man of her choice. Cool to find that in a Penguin Classic. Here's one. I have this actually. So a lot of these classic paperbacks I picked up, I might already have in Penguin Classics, but I'll decide which one to keep down the line. Here's Edels of the King and a selection of poems by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So not just Edels of the King, but you get some of his more famous work. I thought this was a nice, clean edition. I like the cover art. Again, not the old Signet Classics that I'm really interested in, but this was a really good condition. And I'm going to guess this is from the 90s or 2003. So in the 2000s, they're looking like this. Same goes for this copy of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, a book I have in more than one edition already. James Joyce, great novel. Introduction by Hugh Kenner. So again, you might already have an edition, but you want to get this for the intro or the afterword. Hugh Kenner was a good critic. And sometimes you just want like a nice portable copy to read. So there's James Joyce himself, published in 1916. Stephen Dedalus, who would later appear again in Ulysses. I really like the cover of this one. It's Beowulf, translated by Burton Raphael, with new afterword by Roberta Frank. That's a nice, striking cover art. And they actually credit the cover artist, Havoc Media Design. Nice. The year of this edition, well, the translation was 1963, but this edition with the afterword by Roberta Frank is from 2008. Formerly the property of Conestoga High School on the main line, Philly. Berwyn, PA. Not far away. What else do we have? Here's a Signet Classic edition of Mark Twain, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It's kind of nice. Has an afterword by George P. Eliot. I'm going to guess this is an early 2000s version. 83. But it's the 59th printing. So I'm not sure what that takes us up to. And the afterword was from 1959, but this is clearly a newer version of it. A newer reprint. Here's another one of these 80s vintage Phantom classics, another Sinclair Lewis novel. This is 1996. So even in the mid-90s, they were looking like this. Here's Main Street by Sinclair Lewis. A book that I did not finish the first time I tried to read it. I think I had an old Signet Classics edition of this, and this was decades and decades ago. I just couldn't quite crack into it, but the theme of the book is up my alley. The first of Sinclair Lewis's great successes. Main Street shattered the sentimental American myth of happy small-town life with its satire of narrow-minded provincialism. So that's Main Street. It's nice to find that again in a clean edition. This was a really cool anthology, I thought. It's a Signet Classic, again, more recent. 2002 is the first Signet Classics printing, and this was like 20th printing of it. Women and Fiction, short stories by and about women. It's a nice variety of women's fiction. How about this interesting Bantam Political Science paperback? Essential Works of Lenin. Look how severe that type is. Key Writings of the Prophet of Modern Communism. Yeah. So let's see what's in this one. A little old and tanned, but one hell if you're going to come across a Lenin anthology. We have The Development of Capitalism in Russia, What is to be Done, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, The State and Revolution, which I have read that one. The other ones I don't think I've read. So there's Lenin. And this book we already have. My wife has a copy of Watership Down that's, I think, better than this copy. I just have to track it down first before I unhaul this. Sometimes you put things in a bag you already have. And let's finish with some, I have two Penguin Classics and a Oxford World Classic. So here's a nice edition of Hard Times by Charles Dickens, a book that I'm certain I first read that in a Bantam Classics edition from the 80s or 90s, and I no longer have that. And I have the Heritage Press edition of Hard Times, which has some pretty good illustrations in it. I'm keeping that for the time being. This one doesn't look like it's illustrated, but it is Penguin Classics, and it's super clean. So I was happy to find that. I really like this Dickens novel a lot, and it has the advantage of not being as long as your typical Dickens novel. So if you want to try Dickens and you're not in for the time investment he requires, you might want to try Hard Times. Here is an Oxford World's Classic edition of Émile Zola, The Belly of Paris, new translation by Brian Nelson. Unjustly deported to Devil's Island following Louis Napoleon's coup d'etat in December 1851, Florent Quenu escapes and returns to Paris. He finds the city changed beyond recognition. Third volume in Zola's famous cycle of 20 novels, Les Rougens Macquart, introduces the painter Claude Lantier, and in its satirical representation of the bourgeoisie and capitalism complements Zola's other great novels. Cool. And then Madame de Lafayette, The Princess de Cleves. I think I already have this in Penguin Classics, probably somewhere right over here, but I don't have it in this version. You know, there's different series of Penguin Classics. I think I have the even older one than this one. I call these Penguin third series, where you get these borders. I like these editions too. I like how they color coded them. So yeah, published near the end of the 18th century, set hundreds of years earlier in the reign of Henri II. Aristocratic love affair between the most beautiful and virtuous woman and the most chivalrous knight at court. Translated by Nancy Mitford. So that is the bag sale, and I have a few more books to share. This was the most recent book haul. I was at a different Goodwill after getting my hair cut, and I found some cool stuff. So we'll start with one of these Great Courses DVDs. The DVDs are downstairs. We started watching these last night, but it's this 4 DVD course about Pompeii, daily life in an ancient Roman city, Professor Stephen L. Tuck. How wonderful is that? It came with this book. It was in the shrink. It was not even opened. And wow, Pompeii, buried by the volcanic ash of Mount Vesuvius. Everything you always wanted to know about Pompeii is in that course, I'm sure. Here's a Bantam classic. I was really happy to find this, Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. And I looked this up in my book database, and I didn't have a copy of Sons and Lovers anymore. I read it when I was a college student. I remember the edition. It was a penguin with an orange spine, but it wasn't a Penguin Classics. It might have been like Penguin English Library or something. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't keep it. And now that I'm kind of getting back into D.H. Lawrence, I read The Rainbow. I started Women in Love. I should give Sons and Lovers another chance. So I was happy to find that one. I found an Arthur C. Clarke sci-fi book, 2010, Odyssey 2. I don't know if this is any good, so those of you who read sci-fi, let me know. I'm not sure if I should keep this or not. I guess it's a sequel, right? The 2001 Space Odyssey. And I'll almost say the best for last here. This book, this book kind of was like, what is this? I saw the front cover, like, what is that? There's like no text on it. And then you look at the back. Well, look at the spine. When I saw the spine, my jaw dropped. Joy filled my heart. This is a book all about wacky packages. Wacky packages, do you know what these are or were? If you grew up in the 70s, you should know wacky packages. They came with a stick of gum like this, which always split into pieces, into shards like this. They were issued by the Topps trading card company, who did baseball cards and things like that. And these were stickers that were spoofs of consumer products. And what this book is, which is published by Abrams in New York, it's just written by the Topps company, and with an interview with Art Spiegelman and afterward by Jay Lynch, who both worked on wacky packages amazingly. What this is, after those intros is you get every series of wacky packages. These, I think, are full size or even a little larger. So those of us who collected wacky packages like me, this has it all. I think there were 7 series of wacky packages. These are satirical spoofs of products. So it ran up till 1974. Series 7 was 1974. Series 1 was what? 1970. Well, only 73 to 74. So like this small 2-year window of wacky packages. All the kids were collecting these. And I guess I was that age, 73, 74. I would have been like 9, 10 years old. I thought I died and went to heaven when I saw this, because the first series especially is what I collected, and I had like all of them except for 1 or 2. And I put the stickers in a spiral notebook. I still have the pages. I'll show them to you someday if I can find them. They're in a folder somewhere. And I knew I was missing 1 or 2. I never could find the missing pieces. And then series 2, I collected them, but like far less. Series 3, series 4, there's no way I collected all these. But they're all in this book. So what I'm going to do is feature these on a video. I'll probably do a little series, like 1 by 1. We'll go through each series of wacky packages. For those of you who love Man Magazine, who love like that 70s humor, wow, I was all smiles when I found this. I think it only cost me $2 or $3. Just goofy, stupid humor. Wacky packages. Wow, it's like this book was waiting for me to discover it. And I almost passed it by because of that front cover, which meant nothing to me, but it did get my attention. Anyway, yeah, I was just so happy to get it. I'm an easily pleased person. It's just, wow, like my whole youth came flooding back at me. So one of these times I'll do a walkthrough of that book. We'll either do the whole book or we'll just split them into like pieces. I think that's it. That's a lot of books to go through. Thanks for following along. A couple things for comments. If you want to comment, like let me know what you finished recently, what you're actively reading, and if you have any comments about these books I shared. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.